Welcome back to the part 2 video on the muscular system. So this is the part 2 video. I will make mention that if you did not watch the part 1 video on this particular system, please just view my videos in the video playlist and make sure that you watch the first part on the muscular system, because this is part 2. And the only way you'll be able to connect is that if you watch part 1, then you watch part 2. So basically, in the part 1 video, I introduced the muscular system. I talked about what it's all about. We talked about the general structure of a muscle. We talked about the different layers of the muscle, the epimysium, endomysium, perimysium, the myofibrils. We talked about that in the part 1 video. We also talked about the general functions of this particular muscular system that we're talking about. Okay, we also talked about the properties of muscles, such as irritability, contractility, elasticity. We talked about those different properties. And then I also introduced the aspects of insertion as well as the origin with respect to the muscular system. And what I'm showing you right now is where we ended. So in this particular video, we're going to continue now and look at the other aspects that you must know on this particular system. Okay? So one of the most important part I'm going to mention on the part 2 of this particular video are what we call muscle actions. Now, it's important for you to know that as these particular muscles are contracting, okay, they contract in different ways. And then what you are seeing here are basically different types of muscle actions. If a muscle is contracting, yes, in which way is it contracting? In what method is it doing so? That's what we're looking at. So to start with, number one, we're saying that muscle movement that involves shortening of an active muscle are termed as the concentric muscle movement. So if a muscle is contracting, and if that contraction mechanism is making this muscle to reduce in terms of its length or to shorten, we call it concentric muscle contraction action. For example, we're saying that contraction of biceps when flexing the elbow joint. Okay, so if you are free right now, just try to flex your elbow joint. By flexing, I mean let the elbow joint or the hand move towards your body, towards your chest. Okay, that means you're flexing. So in that kind of action, remember that as you are flexing your elbow or as you are flexing your hand, what you are doing is that you are making the bicep muscle to contract or to reduce in terms of its length. And that kind of action, we call it concentric action of this particular muscle. Then there is also an aspect where muscle movement in which active muscles undergoes lengthening is called the eccentric. So in this particular case, instead of the muscle, as it is contracting, instead of it shortening in terms of length, in this particular case, it's lengthening in terms of its length. So movement in which active muscles undergo lengthening. So here the muscle is kind of stretching a bit. Okay, instead of contracting, it's stretching, it's lengthening. Now that kind of muscle action of movement, we refer to it as what? Eccentric muscle movement. For example, lowering weight as the elbow extends. So when you're extending your elbow, think of it like you're extending your help towards someone, meaning you are stretching your muscles or you're extending your hand towards somebody. So in that particular action, what you are doing is that you are increasing the length of this particular muscle. And by the virtue of you increasing the length or lengthening the length of this particular muscle, we simply means that is eccentric muscle action. Now, what if the muscle is contracting? Then it's neither increasing in terms of length, and it's not even shortening. We refer to that as what? Isometric contraction. Contraction of muscles does not involve change in muscle length. The muscle is contracting, but it's not changing in terms of its length. We refer to that as isometric contraction. Remember, iso means equal. So isometric contraction, in which the muscle is contracting, yes, but it's not changing in terms of its length. Okay, it's just remaining the same. So that's the aspect that I wanted you to know on this particular slide. Okay? Another aspect, which is also very, very vital, is you understanding the muscle fiber arrangement. the muscle fiber arrangement. Now, before I even talk about how these particular muscles are arranged in different ways in the body, I'll just take some time to just explain to you what we mean when we say muscle fibers, because some of you get confused when we say muscle fiber. Okay, a muscle fiber is basically a muscle cell. Okay, so we're saying that a muscle fiber is a single elongated cell that contracts to produce movement. That unit in the muscular system, that individual muscle cell that contracts to be able to produce movement, is what we are calling a muscle fiber. So a muscle fiber is basically a muscle cell. That's what we mean. So in this particular video, if I'm saying muscle fiber, just remember I'm talking about a muscle cell, which is the one which is what? Bringing about movement, as it is what? Contracting. So we've said a muscle fiber is a single elongated cell that contracts to produce movement. Okay? So we're saying that these fibers now, we've talked about what a muscle fiber is, which is basically a muscle cell. So when I say these fibers, think of them as a lot of muscle cells. So these fibers are bundled together. So think of muscle cells being bundled together, being assembled together or put together. So we're saying these fibers are bundled together into groups called fascicles. So when you hear the term fascicle, I think I described it. I even showed you in the part 1 video on the muscular system. So whenever you hear a term a fascicle, it's basically a band of muscle fibers or a set of muscle cells. That's what we mean. So these fibers are bundled together into groups called fascicles, and many fascicles make up a whole muscle. So if you think of it like this, we said a muscle fiber is an individual muscle cell, and then when you combine a group of muscle cells, they make what we call a fascicle, okay, or a band of muscle. And then when you combine a lot of fascicles now, they make up the actual whole muscle. That's how it works. So from a single muscle fiber or a single cell, you combine the single cells together or the single muscle fibers together, you form a fascicle. And then these fascicles, you've got a lot of them, they are the ones that are bringing about the entire whole muscle shape. That's how it moves. Okay? So we're saying that each fiber, it simply, if I say each fiber, I mean each muscle cell. Each muscle cell contains what we call myofibrils, okay, which are the actual contractile units made of protein like actin and myosin. Remember, in physiology, the muscle contraction coupling mechanism is brought about due to actin and myosin. So what we're trying to remind you is that this particular muscle fiber, which has got myofibrils, these myofibrils are basically actin and myosin. Remember that the ones that do the swapping and contraction mechanism in physiology. They're the ones that bring about muscle contraction. Okay? So we're saying each muscle fiber or muscle cell, okay, it contains contractile units. And the contractile units of a muscle cell are proteins such as actin and myosin. Okay? So we're saying that if we say thick, we're saying that think of muscles like fiber strands in a rope. I want you to think of these muscles like fiber strands in a rope, because we're saying that a muscle cell or a muscle fiber, they mean the same. Now, I want you to think of them like this. Think of a muscle cell or a muscle fiber as a strand in a rope. You've got a big rope, right? And then in that rope, there are individual strands. So those strands, they're the ones which are acting like muscle fibers or muscle cell. So it simply means that the more strands that you have, it simply means you're going to have a more stronger rope. Similarly, the more fibers packed into a muscle cell mean more strength. So the more fibers that you have, the more the more stronger the muscle is going to become. Okay? That is the concept that we're trying to talk about here. Recap on this particular slide. We say that a muscle fiber is a single elongated cell that contracts to produce movement. If you want, you can just say a muscle fiber is also known as a muscle cell. And then we said these muscle cells or these muscle fibers are bundled together or they are put together into what we call fascicles. Then different sets of big fascicles, when you put them together, they make up the whole muscle. Okay? That's what we're saying. Then the contractile units, those elements, those entities that makes a muscle to contract are proteins such as actin and myosin. That is the concept that I want you to understand on this particular slide. Okay? Now, to make progress, there's also what we call pennate muscles. This is very, very important because students usually get confused when I'm talking about pennate muscles. So you've heard of pennate muscles. Pennate muscles, what are these pennate muscles? How are they different from what we call convergent muscles? Because some of you have heard of things such as bipennate, unipennate, multipennate. Let's explore them and understand the differences that's about with regards to these particular pennate muscles. Okay, so I'm showing you this particular feather here. Feather from a bird, any bird that you like. Okay, whether it's chicken, okay, whatsoever type of bird that you like. Just think of them as these particular pennate muscles being compared to the feathers of different birds. So this is the feather, right, from a bird. Okay. So when you ask what are pennate muscles, we're saying pennate muscles are named after the Latin word feather. Okay, because they are fibers attached to the tendon at an angle resembling the structure of a feather. Now, let me just zoom in a bit here. So if you look at a feather, okay, if you look at a feather, it has got this shaft on the middle here, this shaft on the middle. So think of it in a muscle as a tendon, because these, what you are seeing here are just individual muscle cells, okay? These are just now muscle cells, different myofibrils that have been pushed together. They are the ones that are attached to this particular tendon. So the reason why we say, the reason why we talk about these pennate muscles is because this different arrangement of muscle cells, they resemble a feather. So a feather here, it has got these feathers which are attached to what? This particular shaft on the middle. In the same way, muscles have got what we call a tendon. Remember, I talked about a tendon in the first part of this particular session. I said a tendon is basically a structure that connects a muscle to a bone. So on the middle here, this whitish thing that you are seeing here is a tendon. So by the fact that this tendon is attached to these different muscles, like the way the feather is referred to as a pennate muscle. Now, it's also important for you to know that these pennate muscles are of different types. They are what we call unipennate muscles, they are what we call bipennate muscles, and they are also what we call multipennate muscles. Let's explore those shortly. So that is the concept on this particular slide. Now, types of pennate muscles. Types of pennate muscles. They're very simple. Let me tell you one thing. If you want to make your life easy in understanding the pennate muscles, do not focus on the muscles. Focus on the tendons. Focus on the tendons and how these tendons are being attached to the different muscles. For example, let's start. Let's start with the unipennate muscle. So if this muscle is unipennate, un means one. So it simply means that there are muscles that are running, okay, at an angle. Remember we said, if you look at a feather, let me just take you back a bit, okay? If you look at a feather, you find that these feathers on this particular feather of the bird, this shaft, they attach to the shaft at an angle, not straight, at an angle in this direction, at an angle. The same way, even muscles, if you look at them, okay, these different muscle fibers, they're attaching to this tendon at an angle, not straight, but at an angle, okay? So it's the same concept. So if you're talking about the unipennate muscle, you've got one tendon here. You only have one tendon and it's attached to muscles on only one side, okay? There are these muscle cells, these muscle fibers, but they're just on the same side. So same side, only one side, it makes them unipennate muscles. Very soon I'm going to show you the specific examples in which you can find these particular unipennate muscles. Okay? So whenever you see a tendon that is attached to muscles on just only one side, it becomes a unipennate type of muscle. Okay? Then what about the bipennate? Even them that have got one tendon on the middle. But what is making them bipennate? It simply means, if you see on the unipennate muscle, you have these muscle fibers that are running or attaching to this particular tendon at an angle but only on the same side. But on the bipennate, think of this. If we were to cut this on the middle, right, we just consider this side, it becomes unipennate. But by the virtue of this tendon being attached to also this other side by this particular myofibrils or muscle cells, it becomes bipennate. It simply means one tendon, two different sides of it are attached to this particular muscle fibers. So it becomes a bipennate. Summary. If you're talking about unipennate muscle, one tendon and muscles are only found on one side. Bipennate, one tendon, muscles are found on both sides. Then what about multipennate? It simply means that in this particular case, for it to become mouth means many, it simply means that you've got a lot of tendons. Okay, it's like you've got this bipennate, and then you've got a lot of bipennate muscles putting them together. Like you can see here. Think of this as a bipennate, a bipennate, a bipennate, then you attach them together, they make what we call a mouth pennate muscle. Okay, they have got this big tendon-like, then it's forming these smaller tendons on the middle, another tendon, another tendon. Then all of them, they are attached to muscles at an angle on both sides, making them mouth pennate muscles. Very easy concept, right? So that is it. Summary, you pennate, one tendon attached to one muscles only on one side. Bipennate, one tendon, muscles are touching both sides of, or they're attached to both sides of the tendon. Mouth pennate, you've got a lot of tendons, right? Then all of them are attached to what? To muscles. That's basically the concept on the pennate muscles. So in an exam, they'll ask you, they'll bring diagrams, show us, is this mouth pennate, is this unpennate, is this bipennate? You must be able to tell the difference there. Okay? So similarly, not just knowing about these pennate muscles, of course, there are a lot of muscles in the body. As we explore or finish, or when we reach the conclusion of this entire system, you will know that we talk about a number of muscles in the body. Right? So these, I've already talked about them. You pennate, you can see one tendon attached on the muscles, just on the one side. Bipennate, one tendon, right? And then these muscles are attached on both sides. Mouth pennate. Mouth pennate simply means you've got a lot of tendons on the middle where these muscles are attaching themselves. Then they are what we call circular muscles. Okay, those that are found, for example, on the mouth, in the eyes, they are circular muscles. They are following the shape. Okay, we're going to look at the specific examples. Okay, orbicularis oculi, orbicularis oris. We'll look at those different things. Okay, but these are what we call circular muscles. You can just see from the tape, from the shape. They are more like a circle. Okay, then they're also what we call parallel muscles. They're just parallel to each other. They're just straight. Okay, from one end to the last end, they're just straight. We call them parallel. Something that is parallel, you can see just straight from one end to one end. They are parallel muscles. They are not at an angle. They are not circular. They are not bipennate. They are not unipennate. They are just parallel to each other. They just move from one point to the other point. From one point to another point, we call them parallel muscles. Now, this picture here, which is showing the convergent muscle, is not really the best to be able to show you the difference between mouth pennate muscles and convergent muscles. But for now, I just want you to know that I'll show you the specific picture when I talk about convergent muscles. A convergent muscle is a type of muscle which has got a broad origin. Remember about the concept of origin and insertion, right? That which we talked about in the part 1 of this particular, system. Okay? Convergent muscles have got a broad origin, and then they've got a short or a tiny, or they make a sharp edge as they are going to the insertion region. I'm going to show you very soon, but they're very, very different from what we call, mouth pennate muscles. That this and this are not the same. It's just that this picture is not really showing the actual difference, but very soon I'm going to show you. Okay, so that is what I wanted you to know there. Unipennate, bipennate, mouth pennate, circular muscles, and parallel muscles, as well as what? Convergent muscles. So all these different muscles are found in different areas or structures of the body, which we are going to explore on this particular slide. All right. So let's start and see what we have on this particular slide. All right. So if I was to zoom in there, I've got my man there. Okay, has got these different muscles. Very, the muscular system is very, very interesting. Okay. So I'll start with the simple one. Actually, everything is simple here. Okay. So for example, I'll start with what we call, if you look at this, I know my students who are watching, people from different ends, they can tell that these muscles are in circular motion, making them circular muscles. For example, those that are covering the eye, okay? The eye there, that's where you find the eyes, right? In this particular region. So, for example, we've got what we call the orbicularis oculi muscle, the muscle surrounding the eye there, okay? It's in circular motion, following the shape of the eye. You can also find this particular muscle on the mouth. There's what we call the orbicularis oris muscle, okay? They are in circular motion, all right? And then they're also what we call mouth pennate. Now, mouth pennate, remember I told you the key. If you look at a mouth pennate muscle, focus on the tendon. This major tendon, which is almost forming an aponeurosis-like structure, it has got branched tendons on the mid, another tendon, another tendon, another tendon. It's telling you that it's the fact that it has got many tendons which are attached to these different muscles at an angle, it's making it a multi-pennate muscle. For example, this muscle on the shoulder region, the deltoid muscle, okay? Remember, when you want to inject, when you're giving intramuscular and everything, you go into the deltoid muscle, right? So this is an example of a multi-pennate muscle, the one you find on this particular, deltoid region on this shoulder part. Okay, we call it a multi-pennate muscle. Lovely. I can also see that they have this picture is just almost putting things in order, like that's the way I wanted them to be. Remember, I said I wanted you to understand the difference between convergent muscle and multi-pennate muscle. So if you look at it, see, the multi-pennate muscle has got branched tendons on the mid, right? But if you're talking about a convergent muscle, it's simply a muscle that has got a broad origin. It simply means where that muscle is coming from, it has got a broad starting point. Then it's merging, or this broad point is narrowing, and then they are making a sharp edge or sharp insertion. Okay? It's like a triangle which goes like that. So this muscle is big where it's coming from, then it's making a sharp edge towards the insertion region. For example, the pectoralis major muscle, the one covering the chest, right? So let's just zoom in there. So we've got this particular major pectoralis muscle, this one. So if we say the origin, it simply means this is the origin that we have. So you can see that this major pectoralis muscle, it has got a large origin, or this is the origin. But you can see where it's going to insert. It's making a narrow end, a narrow end. There are no tendons in the middle there. No, you can't see them. It's just a big muscle there that is coming from a big origin surface area. Then it's converging or making a steep, or a sharp end towards the insertion point. That is a convergent muscle. It's different from a multi-pennate one. A multi-pennate one has got what? A lot of tendons on the middle. Okay? That is the difference there. Okay? Let's come this side. What do we have there? There's what we call the fusiform muscle. Now, I don't want my students to get confused between what we call fusiform and bipennate muscle. So, you can see, I think my students can tell that this is not bipennate muscle, because in bipennate we said you have one tendon on the middle, and then it's just having two ends of muscles. For example, here, this is the bipennate muscle. You will put one tendon, then on either side there are muscles. But this one, which looks like this, to give you a hint, whenever you see these different tendons that have got parallel muscles, if you say parallel, they're just coming from this point straight. These muscles are not at an angle. They're just parallel. Okay? They're forming a belly like on the middle, but they've got two different ends on the tendon. We call them the fusiform muscles. For example, the biceps brachii, these that are covering the humerus on the middle there, we call them fusiform biceps muscle. They are not bipennate at all. Okay? So those are fusiform muscles. For example, the biceps brachii. If you find it on this end, even this side, right? You're going to find it, of course. All right, let's move. Then there's also what we call the bipennate. The bipennate muscle, the one that is covering the femoral bone here, basically calling it the femoralis muscle. Remember, I told you that if you know the skeletal system, it becomes very simple for you to understand the muscles, because most of these muscles are named after the bones. Okay, the femoral bone, femoralis muscle. Very simple. Okay, so the bipennate muscle, we said, what did we agree? We said one tendon on the middle, then on the two ends you've got muscles that are attaching to it at an angle. You can see the way these muscles are moving. They're at an angle. They're not parallel, no. They're at an angle. They're attaching to this tendon at what? At an angle. So they become the bipennate muscle. For example, the rectus femoris muscle, covering the what? The femoral bone. Okay, that's that. Right? Then there are also what we call unipennate. Okay, for example, the extensor digitorum longus muscle, which is covering this region here that you are seeing. Okay, so this is what we mean. Unipennate, you can see there's just one tendon there, and muscles are only at one side of this particular tendon. Very simple concepts. Okay, then there are also what we call thin parallel muscles. Parallel, I said they're just coming from that end, not at an angle. They're just moving straight in that direction. Okay, for example, the sartorius muscle that you are seeing here. Okay, coming from this pelvic region there and attaching on this particular knee joint. Okay, so this is an example of what we call a parallel muscle. So basically, that's what I wanted you to know on this particular slide. Let's see if you've understood this concept. Okay, this is a pic that I'm going to give you. So I'm going to pause about 5 seconds for you. If you can answer just by looking at it, you can tell this is a convergent muscle. This is what type of muscle, what type of muscle, what type of muscle. Are you able to tell? Okay, let's see. So what do we have here? This is, of course, see, the what? The circular muscle. Then what do we have here? The one on the chest there. We said major pectoralis. It has got broad origin, then it's converging at one on the end. Okay? For example, this one, A, this becomes orbicularis oris muscle because it's on the mouth. If it was on the eye, it becomes orbicularis oculi muscle. Alright? And then what do we have there on G? That's the deltoid muscle, right? An example of a what? A mouth pennant muscle, which is here. This is a mouth pennant muscle. Okay? What do we have here? A fusiform muscle. I told you the fusiform muscle has got parallel muscles. If you look at them, if sometimes you've got a challenge in identifying them, zoom in, look at it. If you look at these muscles, this is an example of a bipennate muscle because these muscles have got one tendon on the middle and these muscles are attaching to the tendon at what? At an angle. But the fusiform, it's not at an angle at all. They're just parallel to each other. Parallel to each other. And then you can even see the two different tendons on the edge. This making it a fusiform muscle. This one, very simple. What is this one? It's basically a unipennate muscle. Okay? This is an example of a parallel muscle. A parallel muscle. So that's what I wanted you to know on this particular session. Next time when we meet on this particular topic, we'll now explore the different types of muscles that you find on different body areas. And then we're going to look at how they're innervated, look at the different types. Okay, the major ones. Okay, we may not explore everything, but I'll just talk about the major parts that you have to know on the face, okay, on these upper limbs, on the abdomen, the lower part, the perineum and everything. We're going to talk about that. So make sure that you subscribe to this YouTube channel because next time I upload the video, you have to now see how these muscles are being innervated, okay? Remember, it's important for a muscle to be innervated. If not, paralysis, right, is going to take place. So this is where we're going to end in this particular part 2 video on the muscular system. Next time we'll look at we're going to explore now the different muscles. We'll be going body part, and then we'll explore. Since now you've got an idea of what multipennate muscles are, circular muscles are, convergent muscles are, even when we talk about them now in details using different body parts, it will be easy for you to follow through. Don't forget to subscribe to this YouTube channel. See you next time as always.